The hostess looked straight at Emily Carter and slammed the door in her face on Christmas Eve. Not with her hands, with 3 words: "We don't serve wheelchairs." The whole restaurant heard it. Warm bodies, full glasses, holiday music playing, and not one single person moved. But then, a stranger in worn boots and an empty wallet pulled up a chair. And what happened next didn't just change 2 lives. It stopped an entire city in its tracks. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if no one has told you today, welcome. Hit subscribe. You belong here. The cold came in off the street like it had a grudge. It was the kind of December cold that didn't just bite. It settled into your bones and stayed there. The kind that made your fingers go numb before you even realized it was happening. The kind that reminded you, without apology, that the world didn't warm itself up for anybody. Emily Carter sat in her wheelchair at the corner of 5th and Marlowe, just outside the glass doors of Carrington's Bistro, and she breathed. Just breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way her physical therapist had taught her 6 months ago, when the panic attacks first started. Back when she'd still been lying in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how the rest of her life was going to work. "You can do this," she told herself. "You've done harder things." Had she, though? She wasn't sure anymore. Through the glass, she could see the restaurant glowing. String lights looped across the ceiling in soft gold. A Christmas tree stood near the bar, over-decorated the way only a restaurant could get away with. All matching ornaments and no personality. Families pressed around tables, leaning toward each other, laughing with their mouths wide open, the way people only laughed when they felt completely safe. A little girl at the table nearest the window was wearing a paper crown, the kind that comes out of a Christmas cracker, and she was trying to balance it on her father's head while he pretended not to notice. Emily watched that for a moment longer than she should have. Then she looked down at her hands on the wheels of her chair and made herself move forward. She'd reserved this table 3 weeks ago, had called ahead twice to confirm they could accommodate a wheelchair. Had been told both times, "Absolutely, Miss Carter, we'll take care of everything." She'd even confirmed the day before yesterday. She had done everything right. She always did everything right. That was the thing about Emily that most people never understood. She wasn't brave in the dramatic sense. She wasn't someone who charged forward without thinking. She was methodical, careful. She planned and she prepared, and she checked and she double-checked, because she'd learned a long time ago that the world didn't just hand you anything. You had to earn your place in every room you walked into, or rolled into now. Stop it, she thought. She hated when her mind did that. When it took the chair and made it the center of everything, the way a splinter makes itself the center of your whole hand. She wasn't her wheelchair. She knew that. Her therapist had said it. Her sister had said it. Her old colleagues had said it in their careful, practiced voices. She knew it. She just hadn't been out in the world long enough since the accident to remember how to feel it. Tonight was supposed to be the first step. Her friend Carla had tried to come with her, had offered 4 separate times, and Emily had said no every time. Not out of stubbornness exactly, more out of something harder to name. She needed to know she could do this alone, not because she wanted to be alone, but because if she couldn't manage a dinner reservation by herself, then what was she managing? What was any of the therapy for? The exercises, the slow, terrible mornings where she had to rebuild the simplest things from scratch. She needed this night to mean something. So she pushed herself up the slight incline of the entrance ramp. She'd clocked it on Google Maps satellite view, had studied the curb situation, had even called the city accessibility hotline, and she reached out and pulled open the heavy glass door. The warmth hit her first, then the noise, Then the smell of butter and roasted garlic and something sweet, maybe a dessert coming out of the kitchen. For one brief, beautiful second, Emily felt something in her chest loosen up. There you go, she thought. There it is. The hostess station was maybe 10 feet inside the door. A tall woman stood behind it, wearing all black, with her hair pulled back in a way that looked like it had required significant engineering. She was probably mid-30s, pretty in a tired way, and she was scanning the room with the practiced eye of someone who'd done this job long enough to read a crowd the way other people read a newspaper. Her gaze landed on Emily, and something changed. It was subtle, the kind of shift that most people would have missed. A slight tightening around the eyes, a fraction of a second's pause before the professional smile reappeared. But Emily had spent the last 18 months watching people's faces react to her wheelchair, and she'd gotten very, very good at reading that half second before the performance started. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know how bad it would be. "Hi," Emily said. She kept her voice even, friendly. She'd practiced this too, actually. Practice being the one who made it easy for other people, so they wouldn't feel awkward, so the whole thing could just move forward smoothly. She hated that she had to do that. She did it anyway. "I have a reservation. Carter, party of 1, 7 o'clock. The hostess looked down at her book, looked back up, looked very briefly at the wheelchair. Then at the dining room, packed tight with tables and chairs and people and strollers and all the beautiful chaos of a full house on Christmas Eve. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice had that particular texture, clipped, faintly impatient, like she was delivering a fact rather than making a judgment. "We don't serve wheelchairs tonight." Emily blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your wheelchair." The hostess gestured, a short, efficient motion toward the dining room. "You'd block the aisles. We're completely full, and with the configuration tonight, we can't accommodate—" "I called ahead," Emily said. "Twice. I was told—" "I understand that, but the reservation was made without noting the mobility equipment situation. And tonight, specifically, the mobility equipment situation." The words came out of Emily's mouth before she could soften them. Not angry, she hadn't gotten there yet. Something more like disbelief. The kind of disbelief that happens in the split second before it turns into something else. The hostess met her eyes, held them, didn't back down. "I'm sorry," she said again, in the same tone, the apologizing without apologizing tone. The tone that meant, this conversation is over. "We simply don't have the space tonight. I can put you on the list for another evening. It's Christmas Eve." "I understand." "You understand." Emily heard her own voice go flat. Not loud, not the kind of anger that made a scene. Just flat. The way a door goes flat when it closes. "Okay." She didn't say anything else. She turned her chair. Behind her, the dining room had gone slightly quieter in that way rooms do when something uncomfortable is happening and everyone has decided, all at once, that they're very interested in their food. She could feel it, the weight of 30 or 40 people looking at her, or very deliberately not looking at her, which amounted to the same thing. She kept her eyes forward, pushed herself back through the glass door. The cold wrapped around her immediately, like it had been waiting. "Don't cry," she told herself. "Don't you dare." She made it to the edge of the building before she stopped, parked her chair against the brick wall, out of the direct wind. There was a small wrought iron table and 2 chairs on the patio. The summer outdoor seating, folded up and pushed aside, nowhere near open. A string of lights someone had strung along the railing was still on, though, just barely warm, orange and white. She put her hands in her lap and sat very still. She wasn't sure how long she sat there. A minute maybe 5. the kind of time that doesn't move the way normal time does. She was going through the logistics in her head, whether to call a car, whether Carla would be awake, whether there was anything at home she could even make for dinner, whether she was going to be able to hold it together long enough to get back to the car. When the door behind her opened, she braced herself. For the hostess, maybe, or some well-meaning manager with a discount coupon and a practiced apology. But the boots she heard on the pavement weren't heels. They were work boots. Heavy, scuffed, the kind that had been through actual winters. A man came around to the side of the patio, pulled one of the folded chairs away from the wall, opened it, and sat down. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the menu in his hand. A laminated takeout menu from Carrington's, the kind they kept in a holder by the door. He was studying it with the focused attention of someone doing math in their head. He was white, probably late 30s, with the kind of face that would have looked younger if he slept more. Dark circles under his eyes. A jacket that was decent enough but clearly not warm enough for this weather. Work pants. A haircut that had grown out past its intended shape. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, without looking up from the menu, he said, "The chicken piccata any good here?" Emily stared at him. "What?" "The chicken piccata." He tapped the menu. "It's $14.99, which, it's Christmas Eve, so I figure maybe they've earned it. But I've had bad chicken piccata before, and I don't want to make that mistake again." Emily said nothing. The man finally looked up, as though he'd just noticed her expression. "Sorry," he said. "Rude of me. I'm Daniel." He held out his hand. She looked at it, then at him. Then, because there was genuinely no other option, she shook it. "Emily," she said. "Nice to meet you, Emily." He looked back at the menu. "So the piccata. Thoughts?" "I've never eaten here," she said. "Me neither." He folded the menu shut and set it on the table. "I walk past this place every day for 2 years and never went in. Kept telling myself I'd come in for a special occasion." He paused. "I guess this is special enough." Emily looked at him. Really looked at him. The way you do when you're trying to figure out what someone actually wants. "You heard what happened," she said. It wasn't a question. He met her eyes, didn't flinch. "I was behind you in line," he said. "Yeah, I heard." "Then why are you sitting out here? It's freezing." He was quiet for a second, looked down the empty street, at the line of cars parked along the curb, at the traffic light down the block, cycling through green to yellow to red for nobody. "Because," he said, "when I walked back inside and told that woman I'd be sitting out here and could she take my order, she told me—" He paused, chose the word carefully. "She told me that if I wanted to sit outside in the cold, that was my choice. But they were very busy tonight, and she wasn't sure they could accommodate patio seating." Emily stared at him. "She said that?" "Word for word." "So what did you do?" He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small paper bag from the gas station 2 doors down, from which he withdrew a slightly sad-looking, pre-packaged ham sandwich. "I told her she clearly had everything under control," he said, "and I came back out here." Emily Carter, who had not laughed in, she couldn't remember how long actually, weeks, maybe longer, laughed. It surprised her completely. The kind of laugh that comes out before you can catch it. Involuntary. Just a short burst of real sound that she hadn't even known was still in her. Daniel looked at her with the small, careful smile of someone who'd been hoping for that, but hadn't been sure. "There's 2, he said, pulling out another sandwich. I panicked and grabbed 2. "You want one?" She looked at the sandwich, looked at him. "It's Christmas Eve," she said. "I know. I didn't say it was good." He peeled back the wrapper on his. I said there were two. Inside Carrington's bistro, a woman named Sandra Kowalski was having the best Christmas Eve she'd had in 3 years. Her husband, Tom, was finally home. Actually home. Not home but working. Not home but on his phone. But home. With his phone in his jacket pocket and his eyes on her and their daughter Maisie, who was 7, and had recently decided that being 7 was the most important developmental milestone in human history, and intended to mark every occasion accordingly. Maisie was currently on her 3rd bread roll and showing no signs of slowing down. "Maisie, baby, I'm hungry, Mom." "You've had 3 rolls. They're small." Tom caught Sandra's eye across the table, and they shared the silent, private laugh of parents in the trenches. This was what Sandra had wanted. This specific thing. Not a perfect Christmas. Not a magical Christmas. Just this. This ordinary, imperfect, slightly too much butter in everything Christmas. The 3 of them at a table with their coats on the chairs, and Maisie in her paper crown. She had not been paying attention to the hostess station, but the woman at the table next to them had been. Her name was Patricia Nguyen, and she was 61 years old, and she'd seen a lot in 61 years, including several things she wished she hadn't, and she had a very specific and finely calibrated radar for injustice that had been active since approximately 1987. She'd watched the whole thing. The girl in the wheelchair, the hostess, the dismissal. She'd watched the dining room pretend not to notice, had watched the brief, cringing communal discomfort pass through the tables like a ripple, and then had watched everyone very deliberately return to their salmon and their wine and their holiday. And then she'd watched, through the front window, as a man in a work jacket and worn boots had sat down outside with the girl. Patricia set down her fork. Her husband Raymond noticed. He'd been married to her for 34 years, which meant he could read the particular quality of that fork setting, the way other men read weather patterns. "Pat, I'm just going to the restroom," she said. She stood up from the table, smoothed her jacket, and walked, not toward the restroom, but toward the window. Outside, the ham sandwich had turned out to be more acceptable than either of them expected, which both Emily and Daniel agreed was probably a metaphor for something, though neither of them could agree on what. "What do you do?" Daniel asked. "I'm an architect," Emily said. Then, after a beat, "Was an architect. I'm currently in between." "In between," he said. "Yeah." He didn't push it. She appreciated that. Most people pushed it. "You?" she asked. "HVAC," he said. "Heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Mostly commercial buildings, some residential. Also whatever else pays the bills." He said it without apology or self-consciousness, just as a simple fact. "Today I did 2 routes for a buddy's delivery company and 1 service call for a frozen pipe situation in Mount Vernon." "Christmas Eve," she said. "Time and a half," he said. "My daughter wants this one specific thing for Christmas, and it turns out the specific thing is $68. Emily looked at him. "How old is she?" 9. Something shifted in his face when he said it. Not quite a smile, something gentler than that. "Her name's Rosie. She's—" He shook his head slightly, the way people do when they're trying to describe something they don't have words for. "She's something else." "Is she with family tonight?" "My neighbor Bev is watching her. Rosie thinks I'm at the store." He checked his watch, a simple digital one, the kind that does the job without pretending to be anything it isn't. "Which I will be, as soon as I eat this sandwich, because Bev's got a 12 o'clock rule, and I've still got to find a $68 toy in the half hour the Target might still be open." Emily stared at him. "You're spending your Christmas Eve doing this?" He shrugged. "I was hungry. You look like you needed somebody to sit with you." He said it plainly, without drama, the way you'd say, "The sky is blue." I don't mean that in a bad way. I've been where you were, standing at a door where someone just told you that you don't fit. And I know what it feels like when nobody moves. Emily was quiet. The outdoor lights flickered slightly in a gust of wind. "Where's her mom?" Emily asked, and immediately heard herself and said, "Sorry." "You don't have to." "She died," Daniel said. 3 years ago. Cancer. Rosie was 6. The words fell clean and flat into the cold air between them. "I'm sorry," Emily said. "Yeah," he nodded once. "Me too." She thought about saying more, about offering something, the platitudes she'd heard so many times herself since the accident. The, "You're so strong," and the, "Everything happens for a reason," and the, "She'd be so proud of you." She'd hated every one of those things. She kept her mouth shut. After a moment, she said, "She's lucky to have you." He looked at her. His expression was careful, like he was checking whether she meant it. "I hope so," he said. Inside the restaurant, Patricia Nguyen had made a decision. She returned to her table, leaned down, and said something quietly to Raymond, who immediately reached for his wallet. At the next table, Sandra Kowalski had her face turned toward the window. She'd seen the pair of them outside, the man in the jacket, the woman in the wheelchair, the gas station sandwiches, and she felt something tighten in her chest that she recognized from her childhood, from the time her father had been turned away from a rental property, for a reason no one said out loud, but everyone understood. "Tom," she said quietly. He followed her gaze. Maisie had stopped eating her roll. "Mom," Maisie said, "why are those people outside?" Sandra and Tom exchanged a look. "Because," Sandra said slowly, "someone wasn't very kind to them." Maisie processed this. She was 7, and at 7, the world divided very cleanly into kind and not kind, and she had very strong feelings about which side of that line she wanted to be on. "Can we go outside too?" she asked. Back on the patio, Emily had pulled her coat tighter and was trying to decide whether the cold had actually gotten worse in the last 10 minutes, or whether she was just running out of resistance to it, when the door opened again. This time it was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 23, in a server's uniform, carrying a tray with both hands. She walked out onto the patio and set the tray on the iron table without saying anything. On it, 2 steaming bowls of soup, a basket of bread, 2 glasses of water, 2 mugs of what looked like hot chocolate. Emily looked at her. "I didn't order." "Table 14 paid for it," the young woman said, in a voice she was clearly keeping very steady. "And I brought the bread because it's fresh, and I thought—" She stopped, swallowed. "I'm sorry about what happened at the door. I heard it, and I should have said something, and I didn't, and I'm sorry." Emily looked at her. The server, her name tag said Jess, was looking back with the expression of someone who's just done the right thing and isn't entirely sure what comes next. "Thank you, Jess," Emily said quietly. Jess nodded once, quickly. Then she went back inside. Daniel looked at the hot chocolate for a moment. He picked up his mug. "Merry Christmas," he said. Emily picked up hers. "Merry Christmas." And outside the glass, just barely visible through the condensation and the holiday decorations and the warm inside noise of Carrington's Bistro on Christmas Eve, Patricia Nguyen was already standing up from her table. She was heading for the door. She was not alone. Patricia Nguyen was 61 years old, and she had not asked for Raymond's permission since 1994, which was the year she decided to quit her accounting job and open a bakery. And he'd said, "Are you sure about this?" And she'd said, "I wasn't asking." And that had settled the matter permanently. So when she pushed back her chair at table 7 and told Raymond she'd be back in a few minutes, she didn't wait for his response. She already knew what she was going to do. She'd known it from the moment that hostess had opened her mouth. She walked to the coat rack near the front, took her own coat down. Then, after a brief internal debate that lasted approximately 4 seconds, she took Raymond's too. He had another one in the car. He'd be fine. She pushed open the front door. The cold hit her, and she didn't care. The man, Daniel, was saying something that made the woman in the wheelchair laugh again. A short, surprised sound, like someone who'd almost forgotten how. Patricia recognized that laugh. She'd had it herself once, after her mother passed, when she went 3 months without finding anything funny, and then laughed so hard at a ridiculous television commercial that she cried. The laugh of someone coming back from somewhere far away. She walked up to the table and set Raymond's coat across the back of Emily's wheelchair without preamble. "You'll freeze," she said simply. Emily looked up at her. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Patricia sat down in one of the empty patio chairs, like she'd been invited. Because, in her understanding of the world, kindness didn't require an invitation. "Raymond's got a coat in the car. He'll survive." She looked at Daniel. "You warm enough?" "I'm good," he said. She gave him the look that 61 years of reading people had perfected. The look that said, "That's clearly not true, but I'll allow it," and then turned back to Emily. "I'm Patricia," she said. "We were at table 7. "Emily." "I know. I heard her say your name." Patricia folded her hands on the table. "I also heard what that woman said to you at the door, and I want you to know that every person at table 7 heard it, and not one of us said anything. And I've been sitting with that for the last 20 minutes, and I don't like how it feels." Emily was quiet. "You don't owe me forgiveness for that," Patricia continued. "I'm not here for that. I just wanted you to know that someone in that room was paying attention." Something moved across Emily's face. Not quite relief, closer to the feeling of being seen after being invisible for a very long time. "Thank you," she said. Thank you." The door opened again. This time it was Sandra Kowalski, with Tom behind her and Maisie between them wearing her paper crown, holding a folded blanket that she'd apparently taken from the decorative basket near the restaurant's coat check. She walked straight up to Emily with the absolute fearlessness of a 7-year-old who has not yet learned to be embarrassed by doing the right thing. "This is for you," Maisie said, holding out the blanket, "because it's cold." Emily looked at the blanket, then at this small, serious child in the paper crown. "Thank you," Emily said, and her voice had gone a little careful, the way voices do when they're trying not to carry more than they intend to. "What's your name?" "Maisie." "That's a beautiful name." Maisie considered this. "I know," she said, without any vanity at all, just as a neutral fact, and then turned and climbed into the chair next to Daniel and looked at the remaining half of his ham sandwich. "Is that good?" she asked. "No," Daniel said honestly. "Can I have some?" "Maisie," Sandra said. "She can have it," Daniel said, and pushed the rest of the sandwich across the table. "I already ate the good half." Sandra Kowalski sat down across from Patricia, and Tom pulled over a chair from the folded stack near the railing. And within approximately 90 seconds, the patio that had been a place of humiliation 20 minutes ago had turned into something else entirely. Not a party, not a protest, something quieter than both of those things. 6 people sitting together in the cold because the inside had failed to be what it was supposed to be. Emily sat in the middle of it and tried to figure out how to feel. She was not someone who cried easily. She hadn't cried in the hospital, not even the first day when the doctor had sat down beside her and said the words she'd been dreading since she'd woken up in the ambulance. She'd listened, and she'd nodded, and she'd asked practical questions, and she'd waited until the doctor left to press her face into the pillow and make a sound she'd never made before, and hope she'd never make again. She wasn't going to cry now either, but there was something happening in her chest that was almost worse than crying. A loosening, like a knot that had been pulled so tight for so long that she'd stopped noticing it. And now something had caught one end of it and tugged, gently, and she could feel the whole thing starting to shift. She didn't know these people. She didn't know any of them. And yet, Daniel was asking Tom something about the heating system in their house, because of course he was. She'd already figured out that was the thing about Daniel. He asked questions the way other people breathed, naturally and constantly, just reaching out to figure out the shape of the person across from him. Tom was explaining about a noise the furnace made in November, and Daniel was nodding and already diagnosing it by the sound of the description alone, she could tell. His expression shifting into the focused mode of someone in their competence, someone who knew how to fix things. Patricia had pulled out her phone and was showing Maisie pictures of her bakery, which Maisie was examining with the seriousness of a food critic. "Do you make the ones with the sprinkles?" Maisie asked. "I make every kind," Patricia said. "My mom makes cookies," Maisie said, with the matter-of-fact authority of someone who needs the record corrected. "But they don't have sprinkles." "Maisie," Sandra said. "I'm just saying." Sandra looked at Emily, and they shared a brief, involuntary smile. The smile of people watching a child be entirely themselves. "How long have you been in a wheelchair?" Sandra asked, and then immediately said, "Sorry, is that rude? Tom says I do this thing where I just say the thing I'm thinking." "It's fine," Emily said. "About 18 months. Sandra nodded, waiting, not pushing, just open. Emily didn't usually tell the story, not the full version. She had a short version, car accident, complicated recovery, that she used to end conversations, and a medium version that she used with people who seemed genuinely curious, but whom she didn't know well enough to trust with the whole thing. The full version she'd only told twice, once to her sister and once to her therapist. She wasn't sure why she said what she said next. Maybe it was the cold, which had a way of stripping things down to their essentials. Maybe it was the fact that these people had walked out of a warm restaurant and into the dark on Christmas Eve for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. Maybe it was Daniel, who'd been through something real and carried it without performing it, without asking for credit, and who'd somehow made her feel like the specific weight of what she carried was not something to be ashamed of. "I was driving home from a site visit," she said. "I'm an architect. I was designing an adaptive housing complex in Westfield. The kind with features built in for people with mobility limitations. Ironic, right?" She said it without bitterness, just as a fact. November, 2 years ago. There was ice on the overpass. The car in front of me stopped short and She stopped, breathed. The car went through the railing. Nobody spoke. I was in surgery for 6 hours, in the hospital for 3 months. The damage to my spinal cord was extensive, is the word they used. Extensive. She looked down at her hands. I can't walk. Probably won't again. The probably is the part that kept me sane in the beginning. I kept holding on to the probably. My therapist finally told me I needed to make peace with the likely outcome, which is that this is permanent, and that the probably was doing more harm than good. She paused. She was right. I hated her for 2 weeks after she said it, but she was right. Sandra reached across the table and put her hand over Emily's. She didn't say anything, just left her hand there. Emily looked at it. I haven't been out, Emily said, since it happened. Not really. I've done physical therapy, I've done grocery runs, I've done the necessary things. But out. Dinner, a normal Friday evening, a place with other people doing normal things. I haven't done that. Tonight was supposed to be the first time. And then that woman, Patricia started. Yeah, Emily said. And then that woman. Patricia made a sound that expressed, concisely and eloquently, her entire opinion of that woman and the management philosophy that had produced her. She's going to have a long night, Patricia said. I left a message for the manager before I came out here. Emily looked at her. You didn't have to do that. I know I didn't have to. Patricia picked up her mug of hot chocolate. She'd brought her own out from inside, which Emily had not noticed until now, and took a measured sip. But some things need to be said to the right person. The manager needs to know what's happening in his restaurant on Christmas Eve. Tom cleared his throat. For what it's worth, he said, there were other people at their tables who looked uncomfortable. Not everyone was ignoring it. I think some people just didn't know what to do. That's always the problem, Patricia said. Not knowing what to do. As if it's complicated. It feels complicated, Sandra said. In the moment. You're with your family. You don't want to cause a scene. You tell yourself someone else will. Someone else, Patricia repeated. I know, Sandra said. I know. I didn't say it was right. Maisie had finished the ham sandwich and was now sitting with her elbows on the table, her chin in her hands, watching the adults with the intense concentration of a child absorbing data that would inform her entire worldview. Why didn't anyone help her? She asked. The table went quiet. That's a very good question, Daniel said. He was looking at Maisie with an expression Emily couldn't quite read. Something careful and deliberate, like he was choosing his words for reasons that went beyond the immediate conversation. Sometimes people see something wrong, and they freeze. They don't know what to do, or they're scared of making it worse, or they just wait for someone else to move first. But nobody moved, Maisie said. I know. You moved. He was quiet for a second. Yeah, he said. I did. Why? The question landed in the cold air between them, and everyone at the table seemed to lean very slightly toward him, waiting. Emily included. She'd been wondering the same thing since the moment he'd sat down. Not suspicious. She'd moved past suspicious within the first few minutes. Just genuinely curious. In her experience, people didn't do things for no reason. There was always a reason. Daniel turned his coffee cup in his hands, looked at the table. When my wife was in the hospital, he said slowly. Toward the end, there was a day when I had Rosie with me. She was 3. I had her in a stroller because she'd broken her foot. Don't ask, she's always been what you'd call ambitious. And the elevator in the oncology ward was broken. And the nurses kept telling me the other elevator was on the other side of the building. And my wife was on the 4th floor. And Rosie was 3 years old with a broken foot. And I was carrying the stroller and I just... He stopped. I stood there for a minute in that hallway, just trying to figure out how to do the next thing. And everyone walked around me. Not one person stopped. Nobody spoke. Except one person, he said. A maintenance guy. Older guy. Hadn't even been on his way anywhere in particular, as far as I could tell. Just stopped and said, "Can I carry that for you?" And he carried the stroller up 4 flights of stairs. He set the cup down. I don't know his name. I never saw him again. But I think about him probably once a week. He looked up. That's why I sat down. The outdoor lights swayed slightly in the wind. Maisie had gone still, in the way children only go still, when something has reached them at a level below words. That's a good reason, Maisie said finally. Thanks, Daniel said. Patricia made a sound that might have been her clearing her throat. Raymond's coat had slipped from the back of Emily's wheelchair, and she reached across and settled it more firmly. A small, brisk gesture, the kind that said, "I'm not going to make a thing of this," and meant it. Emily watched her do it. She had spent 18 months convinced that the world had contracted, that the accident had done something permanent not just to her body, but to the size of her life, had shrunk it down to the radius of what she could navigate alone, what she could manage without help, what she could reach without asking for anything from anyone. She told herself that was fine. She told herself she was building a new version of herself that didn't need the old measurements. But sitting here in the cold with 5 people she'd met 40 minutes ago, she could feel the walls of that smaller life pressing against something that didn't want to be contained. She thought about the park. She'd been trying not to think about the park, which was her way of managing things she wasn't ready to face. But it was there, the way things are when they won't quite leave. The email from the city planning office, sitting in her inbox for 11 days now, marked important, time-sensitive, still unopened because she didn't know what she was going to say when she opened it. The project was real. The park was real. A 12-acre redesign in the Riverside district, specifically commissioned with accessibility as the core principle. Not an afterthought, not a retrofit, but the whole design built from the ground up around the question of who gets to use this space and how. The commission had come through her old firm, from a colleague who'd tracked her down with an almost aggressive persistence that she'd found both irritating and quietly moving. Marcus. He'd called 4 times before she picked up. Emily, I'm not asking you to come back to the firm. I'm asking you to do this one thing that I genuinely believe no one else can do, not because I'm flattering you, though I am also flattering you. Because the city specifically asked for a designer with lived experience of mobility limitations. And I don't know anyone who knows accessible design better than you did before and who now also lives it. You'd be designing for yourself and for every kid who's ever been left outside while everyone else went in. She'd told him she'd think about it. That had been 11 days ago. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Daniel. He looked at her. "Sure." "If someone offered you a job that you knew you were good at, that you'd been good at, but it required you to trust that you could still do it after everything that's happened, would you take it?" He was quiet for a moment. "What happened to stop you from doing it in the first place?" he asked. "I got hurt," she said. "Physically?" "Yes." "And you still know how to do the job?" "I believe so, theoretically. I haven't tested it." He considered. "Then I think the question isn't whether you can do the job," he said. "I think the question is whether you're going to let the thing that hurt you also take the job away. Because those are 2 separate things, the accident and the work. They don't have to be the same loss." Emily looked at him. She had spent 11 days constructing arguments for why she shouldn't open that email. She had made them very carefully, built them with the precision of someone who designs structures for a living, who understands load-bearing walls and stress points and the exact pressure required to bring a thing down. She had been very thorough. And in 30 seconds, Daniel Brooks, HVAC technician, single father, man with a gas station sandwich and a borrowed jacket, had walked straight through every one of them. "That's annoyingly clear," she said. He smiled. It reached his eyes this time, all the way up. "Sorry." "You're not." "No," he admitted. "I'm really not." The door of the restaurant opened again. This time it was Jess, the server, and she wasn't alone. Behind her was a young man named Carlos, who bussed tables and had been watching the patio through the window for the last 10 minutes, with increasing agitation. And behind Carlos was a woman named Deborah, who was 53 and had been having Christmas dinner alone since her divorce, and had seen enough of this particular kind of quiet cruelty to recognize it from across a room. Jess was carrying a full tray. Hot food this time. Not soup, but actual entrees. The chicken piccata, a roasted vegetable plate, warm rolls. "I talked to the kitchen," she said, setting the tray down. "Marcus, the head line cook, he said to bring this out. He said—" She stopped, looked down at the tray for a second. "He said his mom uses a wheelchair, and if this had happened to her, he'd want someone to do something. So, he did something." She set the plates down one by one. Daniel looked at the chicken piccata. "I owe Marcus an apology," he said, "for doubting the piccata." Jess laughed, a real one, exhausted and genuine. "It's actually really good," she said. "He made it fresh." "Tell him thank you," Emily said. "I will." Jess went back inside, and the table settled into the particular warmth that happens when people eat together in the cold. When the food is good and the company is unexpected. And nobody entirely understands how they got here, but nobody wants to leave. Maisie had commandeered a dinner roll and was tearing it into pieces with an architect's precision, setting each piece at equidistant intervals along the edge of the table. "What are you building?" Emily asked. Maisie looked up. "It's a city," she said. "This is the main road. These are the buildings." She pointed to each roll fragment. "And this," she placed the largest piece in the center. "This is the park." Emily went very still. "Why a park?" she asked. Maisie shrugged. "Because parks are for everyone. That's the rule." She looked at Emily. "Are you going to go back inside?" "No," Emily said. "I don't think so." "Me neither," Maisie said with total finality. "Outside is better." Tom looked at his daughter with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and love, and something that could only be called awe. The feeling parents get sometimes when their child says the thing that cuts clean through everything. "She's been like this since she was 4, Sandra said quietly. "She's remarkable," Emily said. "She is," Sandra agreed. "She absolutely is." From inside the restaurant came the sound of raised voices, not angry exactly, but the clipped, tightly controlled sound of a professional conversation that was not going the direction one party had anticipated. Patricia glanced through the window. "The manager," she said simply. Raymond had appeared at the window from inside, having correctly interpreted the last 20 minutes of events and made his own calculations. He pressed his hand briefly to the glass, looking at Patricia. She gave him a small nod. He nodded back. 34 years. "He's not going to like what he finds," Patricia said, returning her attention to the table. "He shouldn't," Daniel said. "No," Patricia agreed. "He absolutely should not." The outdoor lights swayed again. Maisie had completed her bread roll city and was now explaining the zoning regulations to the remnants of Daniel's gas station sandwich. Daniel was listening with complete seriousness, asking follow-up questions about traffic flow and green space allocation. Emily watched them. She was thinking about the email. She was thinking about Marcus, the line cook who'd made the chicken piccata fresh because his mother used a wheelchair and he wanted to do something. She was thinking about Jess, who'd come outside in the cold and apologized not because she'd been told to, but because she'd been sitting with her silence long enough to need to correct it. She was thinking about Patricia, who'd left a warm restaurant table to sit in the December cold with a stranger, and about Maisie's bread roll park that was for everyone, because that's the rule. She was thinking about what Daniel had said, the accident and the work. They don't have to be the same loss. She'd been treating them as if they were. She'd been holding them together in her hands like they were one thing, one wound, and the weight of carrying both had been the reason she'd stopped moving forward. But what if they weren't? What if the accident had taken something from her, yes, had taken real, irreplaceable things, things she was still grieving and would keep grieving? But what if it had also given her something? Not in the cheap, inspirational poster way. Not everything happens for a reason. but something specific and functional and real. She knew now what it felt like to be on the outside of a door that wouldn't open. She knew it in her body, not just in her understanding. And if she designed the park, if she brought every single thing she knew, before and after, into that 12 acres of public space in the Riverside district, she could make sure that every door opened, not as a courtesy, not as a retrofit, as the foundational principle of the whole design. She could build a place where no one got turned away on Christmas Eve. She exhaled. The decision wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive with music or clarity or the sense of a door swinging open. It arrived quietly, the way the best decisions sometimes do, as a simple recognition that the thing you've been afraid to do is the only thing that makes any sense. She was going to open the email. She didn't say it out loud. There would be time for that. There would be time for the phone call to Marcus at her old firm, for the conversation with her therapist about what this meant and what it required, for the slow, deliberate work of building something real. But she knew. She picked up her fork and tried the chicken piccata. It was, genuinely, very good. "Okay," she said. Daniel looked at her. "Okay?" he said. "Nothing," she said, "just okay." He watched her for a second, reading whatever it was in her face, and then nodded once, the way people nod when they understand something without being told, when the meaning lands without needing to be spoken. Maisie looked up from her bread roll city. "Can I have some of that?" she asked, pointing at the piccata. "Maisie," Sandra started. "She can have some," Emily said. She moved the plate slightly toward the center of the table. "There's enough." Maisie picked up her fork with both hands, the way 7-year-olds do, and served herself with tremendous gravity. In the table on the cold Christmas Eve patio of Carrington's Bistro, which had begun as one woman's humiliation and one stranger's small act of decency, gathered itself a little closer together against the winter, and kept going. The manager's name was Greg Hollister, and he had been running Carrington's Bistro for 11 years. And in 11 years, he had handled complaints about overcooked steak and undercooked fish, and a waiter who'd allegedly flirted with someone's wife, and one memorable incident involving a birthday cake and a severe nut allergy. And he had navigated all of those situations with the practiced composure of a man who understood that the restaurant business was, at its core, the business of managing human disappointment. He had not, in 11 years, walked out of his own kitchen on Christmas Eve to find half his dining room either staring out the front window or actively absent from their tables. He stood at the kitchen door for a moment, trying to read the room. The room was reading wrong. Table 3, empty, coats gone. Table 7, one man sitting alone, watching the front window with his arms folded. Table 12, a couple he didn't recognize, whispering to each other with the intensity of people who'd made a decision and were working out the details. 3 other tables sat untouched, bills paid and folded under water glasses, chairs pushed back. Greg looked at Diane, the hostess. She was standing at her station with the expression of someone who has been waiting for the principal to call them into the office. "What happened?" he said. "There was a situation," Diane said. "What kind of situation?" She told him in the precise defensive language of someone presenting a case rather than confessing a mistake. She talked about the configuration of the dining room, and the width of the aisles, and the liability concern, and the fact that she'd offered to rebook for another evening. She used the word accommodate 3 times. She did not use the word wheelchair until the 4th sentence, and when she did, she said it the way people say words they've decided are technical rather than personal. Greg listened to the whole thing. When she finished, he said, "Where is she now?" Outside, on the patio. Who's with her? Diane paused. Several tables. Greg closed his eyes for approximately 2 seconds, which was the Greg Hollister equivalent of a full emotional breakdown. "Get me a coat," he said. He walked through the dining room toward the front door, and he was aware, in the particular way a restaurant manager is always aware, of every pair of eyes tracking him. The remaining customers were watching, some openly, some through the performance of looking at their phones. He felt the weight of the room on him, the way you feel weather changing. A pressure shift. A drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the thermostat. He pushed open the front door. What he saw on the patio stopped him for a beat. He'd expected something small. One woman in a wheelchair, maybe the one man who'd apparently followed her out. Maybe some awkward lingering, the kind of thing that resolved itself with a discount and a sincere apology. What he found was a table of 7 people eating Christmas dinner in 32-degree weather, completely unbothered, talking like they'd been friends for years. Patricia Nguyen saw him first. She had, as mentioned, been watching the window. "Mr. Manager," she said, with a tone that could only be described as the verbal equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "I was wondering when you'd come out." Greg straightened. Professional composure. 11 years. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Greg Hollister, the manager. I understand there was an incident earlier, and I'd like to—" "An incident," Patricia repeated. "A situation," Greg corrected. "I'd like to speak with—" "Emily," Patricia said. "Her name is Emily Carter. She had a 7 o'clock reservation. She confirmed twice." Greg turned to Emily. He looked at her. Really looked at her, which Diane had apparently failed to do in any meaningful sense. And he saw a woman in her early 30s with careful eyes and a straight back, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned, through practice, to take up exactly the amount of space she'd been allocated, and not 1 inch more. She was wearing Raymond Nguyen's spare coat over her own. There was chicken piccata on the plate in front of her. "Miss Carter," he said, "I am deeply sorry for what happened at the door tonight. There is no version of that interaction that should have gone the way it did. And I want you to know that it does not represent—" "Does it represent your policy?" Emily asked. Greg paused. "I'm sorry?" "And you are—" "Just a customer," Daniel said. "Or, I was going to be. I'm Daniel Brooks." He didn't extend his hand. "Your hostess told me that if I wanted to eat outside in the cold, that was my choice, and that patio service wasn't available tonight. So, I'm sorry as in, what you experienced tonight was wrong, and I should have known about it before it happened. And I didn't, and that's on me." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," she said. Greg blinked. "I'm sorry?" "It's cold, and you're blocking the view from the window, and I think if you stand there much longer, Patricia is going to say something that makes us all uncomfortable." She moved her wheelchair slightly to the left, making room. "Pull up a chair." Patricia made a sound that suggested she had, in fact, been about to say something. Greg Hollister, manager of Carrington's Bistro, 11 years of professional composure, pulled up a chair and sat down at a folding patio table on Christmas Eve in 32-degree weather. Maisie looked at him. "Do you like chicken piccata?" she asked. "It's my favorite," he said. "Ours too," she said, gesturing at the table with the authority of someone who'd been there longest. Greg looked at Daniel. "I'll comp the entire table," he said. "Everything, including—" He looked at the gas station sandwich wrapper that had been pushed to the edge of the table. He chose not to ask. "You don't need to do that," Emily said. "I want to," Greg said. "And I'm going to need to have a—" Emily was quiet for a moment, looking at the table in front of her. The piccata, the bread rolls, the makeshift city Maisie had built from dinner rolls that had mostly been eaten now, but whose outlines remained on the tablecloth. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Merry Christmas," Maisie said, with tremendous finality. He went back inside. The door had barely closed when Patricia looked at Emily and said, "You handled that well." "I handled that exactly the way you coached me by example," Emily said. Patricia's expression shifted into something that could almost be called a smile. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Tom was watching his daughter, who had found a pen somewhere. He genuinely couldn't track how Maisie acquired objects. It seemed to happen independently of any observable process, and was drawing a new city on her paper napkin. "She's going to be an architect," Tom said, in the offhand way people make predictions that turn out to be true. Emily looked at the napkin. Maisie had divided it into a grid and was filling in each block with something: buildings, paths, what looked like a large open square in the center, with small figures standing in it. "What's that?" Emily asked, pointing to the square. Maisie looked up. "The park," she said. "I told you. Parks are for everyone." "You keep coming back to that," Emily said. "Because it's important," Maisie said, as though this should be obvious. Emily looked at Daniel. He was watching her with the same steady, unhurried attention she'd come to recognize in the last hour. The attention of a man who paid close enough notice to other people that he usually didn't need to ask what they were thinking. "You made a decision," he said. It wasn't a question. "When did I do that?" "About 10 minutes before the manager came out. Something changed in your face." Emily looked at him. "You're very observant for someone eating a gas station sandwich." "I was eating the chicken piccata by then," he said. "The sandwich was 40 minutes ago. Keep up." She laughed, and this time the laugh didn't surprise her. It just came, easy and real, the way it used to before everything. "There's a project," she said. "A park, actually. The city commissioned it. Accessible design, built from the ground up for people with mobility limitations, vision impairment, a whole range of needs. My old firm reached out. They want me to lead the design." "And you haven't said yes," Daniel said. "I haven't opened the email." He was quiet. "Why?" Sandra asked, not pushing, genuinely asking. Emily thought about how to say it. She'd been thinking about how to say it for 11 days, which was maybe why it came out clearly now. Sometimes you need the full incubation period. "Because if I say yes and I fail," she said, "then the accident wins. The thing that happened to me gets the last word on who I am and what I'm capable of. And I've been managing that fear by not testing it, by not putting myself in a position where I could fail at the thing that mattered most." She paused. "Which, I am aware, is also a kind of failure, just a quieter one." Nobody spoke for a moment. Raymond Nguyen, who had been largely quiet inside for the last 30 minutes, chose this moment to open the front door and step out onto the patio. He was wearing his second coat, the one from the car, and he was carrying 2 mugs of something hot that he set on the table without explanation, before pulling his chair next to Patricia's and sitting down. Patricia looked at him. 34 years, she said. He always knows when to show up. Raymond patted her hand. He looked at Emily. "My wife told me what you said," he said. He had a quiet, deliberate voice, the kind built on the habit of not speaking until he had something worth saying. "About the project." Emily nodded. "I'm a civil engineer," Raymond said. "Retired. 31 years with the city." He folded his hands. "I worked on accessibility compliance for public infrastructure for the last 12 years of my career. ADA retrofitting mostly, which means I spent 12 years fixing things that should have been right the first time." He looked at the table. "The problem with retrofitting is that you can make something technically compliant without making it actually usable. There's a difference between a ramp that meets code and a ramp that a person actually wants to use. Between a path that's wide enough on paper and a path that feels," he searched for the word, "welcoming, like it was designed for you, not for the minimum legal requirement." Emily was very still. "The park," she said. Any public space, Raymond said. The difference is usually the designer. Whether they understand what it feels like to need those features, or whether they're working from a checklist. He looked at her directly. There aren't many people who know the design side and the lived side. My old colleague said something similar, Emily said. Your old colleague is right, Raymond said. And I don't say that about many people. He looked at Patricia. She'll tell you I don't hand out compliments easily. Like pulling teeth, Patricia confirmed. The point, Raymond continued, is that the fear of failing is a real thing, and I'm not going to minimize it. But the particular failure you're afraid of, the one where the accident gets the last word, that failure already happened the moment you decided not to open the email. Every day you don't open it, it wins a little more. Emily looked at him. That's the most direct thing anyone has said to me in 18 months, she said. I'm an engineer, Raymond said. I don't do gentle slopes when a straight line will do. Patricia made the sound she made when Raymond said something she'd been thinking but hadn't gotten to yet. Daniel had been listening to all of this with the quiet attention of a man who understood that this particular conversation was not his to guide, just to witness. But Emily turned to him now, and she looked at him with an expression that had something specific in it. Something she was trying to say without quite saying it. What you said earlier, she said, about the maintenance guy, with the stroller. Yeah? Do you think he knew what that meant to you? Daniel thought about it. No, he said. I don't think he had any idea. I think he just saw someone struggling and helped, and then went on with his day. But you've thought about him every week for 3 years. Yeah? Why do you think that is? He turned the coffee cup in his hands. It had gone cold, but he held it anyway, the way people hold things when they're thinking. Because I was at the lowest point I'd been in my life, he said. My wife was upstairs dying. My daughter had a broken foot. I was alone in a hospital hallway, trying to figure out the next 5 minutes. And this stranger just stopped. For no reason except that stopping was the right thing. He paused. When you're that low, a small thing lands different. It doesn't feel small anymore. It feels like proof, like evidence. Evidence of what? Maisie asked. She'd been drawing, but she was listening. She was always listening. Daniel looked at his daughter, at Maisie, who wasn't his daughter, but who was somehow carrying herself at this table with the ease of someone who belonged to it. And the distinction didn't feel important right now. That people are worth it, he said. That they can surprise you. That the world still has... He stopped. Tried again. That when things are bad enough, that you stop believing anything can be good. Someone will come along and do one small thing, and it'll remind you. Maisie processed this for 3 full seconds. Like you sitting down outside with Emily, she said. Daniel looked at Emily. Emily looked at Daniel. Yeah, he said. Like that. Sandra had gone very quiet, in the way she went quiet when she was moving something around in her chest, organizing it into something she could carry. Tom reached under the table and took her hand, which she held without looking at him, because sometimes the looking makes it harder. It was Patricia who broke the quiet, the way Patricia did things, directly and without apology. Emily, she said, open the email. Emily looked at her. Not right now, Patricia said. Not tonight, but tomorrow. Before you make coffee, before you talk yourself out of it, before you build one more reason why you're not ready. Open the email. She paused. You sat outside on a restaurant patio in 32 degrees on Christmas Eve because a woman behind a hostess stand told you that you didn't fit. And you're still here. You're eating chicken piccata, and you made a manager sit down, and you've been carrying on a real conversation with 6 strangers like you belong here. which you do. She looked at her steadily. You're ready. You've been ready. You just needed someone to tell you that someone else could see it. Emily held Patricia's gaze. She wanted to deflect. She knew how to deflect. She'd gotten very good at receiving something real and redirecting it, softening it, giving it back in a smaller, safer form. It was armor, and it had been useful, and it had also been quietly strangling her for 18 months. She made herself not use it. Okay, she said. Okay, Patricia said. Okay, Maisie repeated, nodding firmly, returning to her drawing. Jess came out with the dessert menus, and Marcus had apparently decided the dessert menu was a formality, because behind her came Carlos, carrying a tray with what appeared to be 6 individual chocolate soufflés and one smaller one for Maisie, which she accepted as her natural due without looking up from her napkin city. The soufflé was extraordinary. This fact was established immediately and unanimously, and without debate. Tell Marcus, Daniel said to Jess, that the piccata is forgiven and the soufflé is... I don't have words. I'll tell him, Jess said, and the smile she was wearing now was a completely different thing from the careful, professional smile she'd had at the beginning of the evening. They ate the soufflés in the comfortable silence of people who found, unexpectedly, that they don't need to fill every space with words. The cold had become something they'd all agreed to stop noticing. Maisie's paper crown had tilted to one side. Raymond had both hands wrapped around his mug. Tom was watching Maisie draw with the expression he wore at her school plays and her soccer games, and all the other occasions where she reminded him, without trying to, of how short and strange and precious the whole thing was. It was Daniel who said, eventually, I need to go. He said it with the reluctance of someone acknowledging a fact they'd been hoping would stop being true. Rosie, Emily said. Bev's 12 o'clock rule, he said. And I still need to find the $68 toy, Emily said. Yeah. What is it? He looked faintly embarrassed, which was the first time that evening she'd seen him look anything other than steady. It's a kit, he said. An architecture kit. The kind where you build little model buildings with these tiny pieces. She saw it at her friend's house, and she's been... He shook his head. She's been talking about it since October. She wants to be an architect, or a doctor, or possibly both. She hasn't committed. Emily went very still. Daniel looked at her. What? He said. She was already reaching into her bag. Not her purse, the satchel she carried, the one she'd started carrying again in the last few months. The one with the pens and the notebook and the old, familiar, organized weight of it. She unzipped a pocket. I have a friend, she said, who owns an architectural supply shop on Clement Street. He keeps late hours around the holidays for exactly this kind of emergency. She found what she was looking for. A business card, slightly bent at one corner, with a handwritten cell number on the back. She held it out to Daniel. His name is Victor. Tell him Emily Carter sent you. He'll have the kit. Daniel looked at the card. Emily? It's a phone number, she said. It's not a big thing. He looked at her with the same expression she'd seen earlier, when she'd shaken his hand outside in the cold, when none of this had started yet. The expression of someone taking the measure of a thing before deciding whether to trust it. He took the card. Thank you, he said. He stood up, put his jacket on, pushed the chair back in. He looked around the table, at Patricia, who gave him a short nod that carried more warmth in it than a longer gesture would have, at Raymond, who extended his hand across the table, and which Daniel shook once, firmly, at Tom and Sandra, who were leaning together in the easy, unconscious way of people who've spent enough years side by side that closeness has become their default setting. He looked at Maisie. You're going to be something, he told her. Maisie looked up from her drawing. She considered him with those same wide, evaluating eyes. I know, she said. And then, because she was 7, and she decided this man was worth the effort. "Merry Christmas, Daniel." "Merry Christmas, Maisie." He turned to Emily last. She was looking at him with something he hadn't seen on her face before. Not the careful, defended look she'd had outside the restaurant door. Not the cautious look she'd had for the first part of dinner. Something more open than either of those things. Something that looked, he thought, like a rival. Like someone who'd been traveling a long time and had just recognized, suddenly, the particular quality of the light. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Merry Christmas, Daniel." She paused. "Go find the toy." He smiled, and it was the full version, the one that reached all the way up, and he turned and walked off the patio and down the sidewalk and turned left at the corner and was gone. Emily watched the space where he'd been for a moment. The table resettled around his absence, the way tables do when someone leaves. Not back to what it was before, exactly, but finding a new equilibrium that still held the shape of the person who'd been sitting in it. "He's a good man," Sandra said quietly. "Yes," Emily said. "You're going to stay in touch," Patricia said. Not a question. Emily thought about it. Thought about the card she'd given him. About Victor on Clement Street, who kept late hours. About the way Daniel had looked at her when she'd handed it over. Not like she was giving him something, but like they were making an even exchange. Which they were. "Yes," she said. She was sure of it in the way she was sure of structural things, load-bearing things, things built on real foundation. Not because it was inevitable, but because it was true. The door of the restaurant opened one more time. Diane, the hostess, came out. She had her coat on and her bag over her shoulder, which meant her shift was over, or she'd decided it was, and she was leaving. She walked out onto the patio and stopped when she saw the table. Fully occupied, fully fed, fully in the middle of a Christmas that had turned into something she hadn't anticipated and couldn't quite categorize. She looked at Emily. Emily looked back at her. Diane opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She started. "You don't have to," Emily said. "I wasn't going to," Diane said, and stopped, and started again, and it was clear that she was fighting something internal, some wall that had been in place a long time and that tonight had done something to the foundation of. "I was wrong," she said. "What I said, it was wrong." She said it like she'd been holding it in her chest since the moment Emily had turned away from the door, like saying it was the only way to breathe properly again. Emily looked at her for a long moment. She thought about everything she could say, about the word accommodate, about the phone calls, twice, both confirmed, about the moment of standing in the cold with the weight of the room's silence on her back. She thought about what Daniel had said, that a small thing lands different when you're at the bottom. "Okay," Emily said. Diane looked at her. "Go home," Emily said. "It's Christmas Eve." Diane nodded, once, quickly. She turned and walked off the patio, and she didn't look back. And whatever was happening in her face as she walked away was hers alone to carry. Patricia watched her go. "Generous," she said. "Tired," Emily said honestly, "of carrying things I don't need to carry." She looked at the table, the empty soufflé cups, the breadcrumbs, the last of the hot chocolate, Maisie's napkin city with its park in the center. "I have enough to carry." Tom looked at his watch and made the sound of a man realizing it was later than he'd thought. Sandra began gathering Maisie's things, who submitted to the process with the resigned cooperation of a 7-year-old who has extracted everything possible from an evening and accepts that it is over. She kept her napkin city. She folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket. "For the refrigerator," she explained to Emily. "Obviously," Emily said, as the table began to break up, the way all good tables eventually do, with the slow accumulation of goodbyes, the exchanging of numbers, the making of vague but genuine plans. Emily sat still in the middle of it and did something she hadn't done in a long time. She let herself feel it. The whole evening. The cold, and the piccata, and the bread roll park, and Daniel's borrowed steadiness, and Patricia's unborrowed directness, and the small, impossible warmth of people who had no reason to show up, and showed up anyway. She let herself feel all of it. And then she took out her phone. She found the email from Marcus at her old firm, 11 days old, marked important and time-sensitive, still unopened. She was not going to open it tonight. She'd made that decision when she'd said tomorrow, before coffee. She was going to keep that commitment to herself. But she looked at the subject line. Project Riverside, Community Accessible Park, Lead Designer Offer. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put her phone away and finished the last of her hot chocolate, which had gone cold, but was still, somehow, exactly what she needed. The next morning came in gray and quiet, the way mornings do after something significant has happened. Like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see if you're going to follow through. Emily woke at 6:47, 13 minutes before her alarm. She lay in the half-dark of her bedroom and looked at the ceiling and thought about what she'd promised herself the night before. The specific promise, the one with the conditions attached. Before coffee, before the thinking yourself out of it, before the slow accumulation of reasonable objections that had kept the email unread for 11 days. She reached for her phone before she was fully sitting up. The email was there, exactly where she'd left it. Subject line: Project Riverside, Community Accessible Park, Lead Designer Offer. Sender: Marcus Webb, Webb & Carter Architecture. The firm she'd co-founded 9 years ago and left, in the technical sense, when the hospital stay had stretched past 3 months, and she'd quietly signed her partnership interest back to Marcus because she hadn't known what else to do. He'd told her at the time that it wasn't permanent. She'd said okay. Neither of them had said much else, because neither of them had words for the thing that was happening. She opened the email. It was long. Marcus had always written long emails, the kind that thought out loud, that circled back and revised themselves mid-paragraph. She'd teased him about it for years. Marcus, it's a site visit confirmation, not a dissertation. And she felt the familiar texture of him in every sentence, the particular way he'd always been able to hold complexity without flattening it. He laid out the project in full. 12 acres in the Riverside District, city-commissioned, fully funded, with a timeline of 18 months from design approval to groundbreaking. The brief was specific. Not ADA compliant as an addendum, but accessibility as the generative principle. Every path, every surface, every grade change, every piece of outdoor furniture, every water feature, every sightline. Designed first around the question of who might be excluded, and then rebuilt so no one was. He wrote, "The City Planning Board used the phrase, 'radical welcome.' I told them I knew someone who could build that. I wasn't exaggerating." And then, near the end, a paragraph that she read twice. "I know you've been careful about what you take on. I know there are 100 reasons to wait until you feel more ready. And I know you well enough to know you can build a very convincing case for waiting. But I also know that you designed accessible features for 7 years before your accident, out of professional conviction. And now you know something that no amount of professional conviction can teach. You've been on the outside of a door that wouldn't open. Build the door that does." Emily set the phone down on the mattress. She sat with that for a while. Then she picked the phone back up and called him. It rang twice. "Emily?" His voice had that particular quality it always had, when he was surprised, but trying to sound like he wasn't. "It's 7 in the morning." "I know what time it is," she said. "You opened it." "I opened it." A pause. She could hear him breathing, and in the breathing she could hear the last 18 months of patience, of calling 4 times before she picked up, of leaving the door open in all the ways a person can leave a door open without forcing it. "And," he said. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." "I work from my own space, not the office, not yet. I'll set up a home studio and you route everything through me remotely. Site visits we handle on my schedule and with full accessibility scouting in advance. No showing up somewhere and discovering the grade is wrong after I'm already there." "Done," Marcus said immediately. "I lead the design. Not consult, not advise. Lead. My name on the project, my decisions on the core principles. You can push back on practical constraints, but the accessibility framework is mine, and it doesn't get diluted in committee." "Emily, it was always going to be yours. That's why I called you. And I want to talk to the community before I draw a single line. Real people who use the Riverside District. Wheelchair users, parents with strollers, elderly residents, visually impaired users. I want to sit with them before I sit at a drafting table." Marcus was quiet for a moment. She knew that quiet. It was his thinking quiet, not his hesitating quiet. She'd learned the difference over 9 years. "That's going to push the preliminary timeline," he said. "I know," she said. "It's worth it." "Yes," he said. "It is." Another pause. "Is that everything?" "No," she said. "One more thing." "Name it." "There's a 9-year-old girl named Rosie Brooks who told her father she wants to be an architect. I want to know that if she wants to come see the design process at some point, not a formal thing, just a real look at how this works, that's something we can make happen." The pause this time was different. Longer. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had shifted into the register she'd only heard from him a few times in 9 years, the one that didn't have professional distance in it. "Who is she?" he asked. "The daughter of someone who sat outside in the cold with me on Christmas Eve and reminded me that the accident and the work are 2 separate things." She heard Marcus exhale. Long. Slow. "Yeah," he said. "We can make that happen." "Okay," Emily said. "Okay," Marcus said. "Welcome back." She didn't cry. She'd been right about that. She wasn't a crier. But she sat on the edge of her bed for another full minute after she hung up, with her phone in both hands and something in her chest that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like forward. Then she went and made coffee. She was on her 2nd cup when she picked up her phone again and opened a new text message. She'd put his number in last night, after he'd left the patio and before the table had fully broken up. He'd given it to her without her asking, just written it on the back of the same kind of paper receipt he'd pulled his wallet from. And she'd put it in her phone with the simple efficiency of someone recording a fact. She typed, "Called Marcus this morning. Taking the project. Thank you for the straight line." She sent it before she could think too hard about it. His reply came 4 minutes later, which told her he was already awake, already moving. Given what she knew about his schedule, she suspected he'd barely slept. Good. Rosie got the kit. She was up at 5 a.m. building. Currently has 3 model buildings and 1 very ambitious bridge. Merry Christmas. Emily looked at that message for a moment, then she typed back. Tell her the bridge needs counterweights if she wants it to hold. 3 seconds. She says she knows, and she already added them. She says to tell you hi. Emily set the phone down and smiled at her kitchen wall, which had not recently done anything to deserve being smiled at, but received it anyway. The days between Christmas and New Year have a particular suspended quality. Time moving but not quite counting. the ordinary rhythm of things slightly out of sync, like a song played in the wrong key but recognizable. Emily moved through those days differently than she'd moved through any days in the previous 18 months. Not dramatically. Not with the sudden, movie version transformation she'd always privately distrusted in stories about recovery. But differently. She called her sister on the 26th and told her about the project. And her sister, who had spent 18 months being carefully optimistic in the exhausting way only family can sustain, made a sound on the phone that was equal parts relief and laughter and a few other things that didn't have clean names. "I told you," her sister said. "You did," Emily said. "I told you 100 times." "You did. And you didn't believe me." "I know," Emily said. "I needed to believe it myself. There's a difference." Her sister was quiet. "Is there someone?" Emily thought about how to answer that. "There are several someones," she said. "I had a very unusual Christmas Eve." "Tell me." She told her. Not all of it. Some of it was hers and Daniel's, and didn't need to be handed around. But enough. The hostess, the cold, the gas station sandwich, the chicken piccata, Maisie and her paper crown and her bread roll city with the park in the center. Patricia, unbothered and direct, who had taken Raymond's coat off the rack without asking and placed it across Emily's chair with the matter-of-fact love of someone who'd been waiting decades to do exactly this kind of thing. Her sister listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was, for her sister, an act of considerable restraint. "That little girl," her sister said finally. "Maisie. I know. Parks are for everyone. That's the rule." "I know." "Emily." Her sister's voice had gone soft, in the way it went soft when she was about to say something real. "Build the most beautiful park they've ever seen." "I'm going to," Emily said. She meant it the way you mean things, when you stop meaning them in the abstract and start meaning them in the body. When the intention and the will and the ability line up into something solid, something you can feel the weight of. She started working that week. Not drafting, not yet. First, the conversations. She contacted the Riverside Community Center and asked for 2 hours of their time in early January. She emailed the city's Disability Services Coordinator and asked for a list of residents who might be willing to talk. She reached out to 2 organizations she'd worked with before the accident, the kind that did grassroots accessibility advocacy, the kind that had been fighting for years for exactly the sort of thing she was now being paid to build. She got a response from one of them within an hour. The director, a woman named Felicia Okafor, who'd been doing this work for 20 years, wrote back, "We've been hoping for this project for a long time. We've been hoping for someone like you to lead it even longer." Emily read that email 3 times. Each time it landed differently. She was in the middle of answering Felicia when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. "Ms. Carter?" The voice was male, official in that particular mid-level management way. "This is Kevin Park, Assistant Communications Manager at the Riverside City District Office. I'm calling because..." A pause. "I'm going to be honest with you. This is a little unusual." "Okay," Emily said. "We received a phone call from a Patricia Nguyen, who indicated she was present at an incident at Carrington's Bistro on Christmas Eve, involving a customer with a disability being denied service. She called to report it, and then, when I mentioned we were unfamiliar with the details of the Project Riverside Commission and suggested she reach out to planning directly, she proceeded to..." Another pause. "She proceeded to stay on the line for 45 minutes and give me a complete briefing on the project, the community need, and a detailed assessment of why you are the right designer for the job." Emily pressed her hand over her mouth. "She also," Kevin continued, with the voice of a man reading from notes, because the alternative would be trying to paraphrase Patricia Nguyen, and he had correctly identified that as an impossible task, provided me with 3 published papers on accessible park design, 2 peer-reviewed studies on the psychological impact of exclusionary public spaces, and a personal anecdote about trying to navigate a retrofitted city park with a friend in a wheelchair in 1987 that I found. He stopped. Quite affecting.
That sounds like her, Emily managed.
She asked me to call you and let you know that the city is fully aware of the project and that there is, quote, absolutely no institutional reason for delay, and anyone who creates one will hear from her personally. He hesitated. I'm not entirely sure how to file that portion of the call. Just file it under motivation, Emily said. Yes, he said with feeling. I think I will. She called Patricia the moment she hung up. Patricia picked up on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, Patricia said. You spent 45 minutes on the phone with a city administrator on the day after Christmas. I've spent longer, Patricia said. Raymond can confirm. There was a zoning issue in 2011 that took 4 months. Patricia. Emily. Emily stopped trying to find the right words and just said the actual one. Thank you. Patricia was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was being real rather than efficient.
You know what I thought about this morning? Patricia said.
What?
That girl who was outside in the cold last night.
The one who'd confirmed her reservation twice and come out alone on her first real night back in the world, and sat against that brick wall with her hands in her lap. A pause. I don't want that to be the last image anyone has of her. Emily's throat did something she didn't entirely have control over. It won't be, she said. No, Patricia agreed. It won't. They talked for another 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with parks or architecture or city administrators. About Raymond's retirement and Patricia's bakery, and a bread recipe that Patricia had been refining for 3 years and still wasn't satisfied with. And whether the chocolate souffle at Carrington's had used a water bath or a dry oven, which they both agreed was the central unresolved question of the evening. When she hung up, Emily sat with the phone in her lap for a moment. She thought about what Daniel had said, about the maintenance man in the hospital hallway who'd carried a stroller up 4 flights of stairs and never known what it meant, about how a small thing lands different when you're at the bottom, about how that man had become, without knowing it, someone Daniel thought about every week, a permanent fixture in the architecture of who Daniel Brooks was and how he moved through the world. She wondered what Daniel didn't know that he'd given her. Not the practical things, not Victor on Clement Street with the architectural kit, not the push to open the email, not even the specific clarity of the accident and the work are 2 separate things. Those were real, and she'd carry them. But underneath those, something less nameable. Something about the way he pulled up a chair without announcement, without calculation, without needing to be the hero of the story. He'd just sat down. He'd just been present. In a moment when every other person in that restaurant had weighed the cost of moving and decided it was too high, he'd done the math differently. She didn't think he thought of himself as a generous person. She'd gotten that sense very clearly. That he did what he did, not from an abundance of anything, but from a kind of fundamental stubbornness about what the right thing was. Like he'd decided a long time ago, probably somewhere in the worst years with his wife, that there was a way of moving through the world that he wasn't willing to give up on, and he'd held onto it with both hands through everything. And it had cost him nothing, because he'd never counted it as something to lose. She thought about that a lot in the days after Christmas. She thought about it when Marcus sent over the preliminary project brief, and she opened it and felt, for the first time in 18 months, the particular electricity of a problem that needed solving. The specific, focused aliveness of sitting with a design challenge and feeling her mind begin to move around it, like a muscle she'd forgotten she had, finding use again. She thought about it when she took herself to the Riverside District on a Thursday morning. Not to scout formally, but just to move through the space, to feel the streets under her wheels, and the grade changes in her arms, and the places where the current design made her invisible, and the places, fewer but they existed, where it didn't. Where someone had gotten it right. Some anonymous designer from some previous year who'd thought hard enough about who was going to be here. She thought about Daniel sitting outside in the cold with a gas station sandwich. Not because he had something to prove, but because not sitting there would have cost him something that mattered more than warmth. She thought about Maisie's bread roll park. Parks are for everyone. That's the rule.
She was going to build the most generous thing she could. Not perfect. She knew enough about design to know that perfect was the enemy of finished, and finished was the enemy of good. And good, actually good, built on real understanding and real need, was the whole point. But generous. Designed with a specific intention of expanding who belonged. Every path, every surface, every sightline, asking the question Daniel had answered without being asked. Is there room for her here? The answer, when Emily Carter was done, was going to be yes. Unambiguously, structurally, permanently, yes. On the last day of the year, she got a text from Daniel. No preamble, no explanation, because they had already established that they were the kind of people who didn't need those. Rosie finished the bridge. It held. She wants to know if she can show you sometime. Emily looked at that message in the quiet of New Year's Eve, with the preliminary sketches for Project Riverside spread across her drafting table and a mug of tea gone cold beside her. She typed back, "Tell her yes. Tell her I'd like that very much." She set the phone down and looked at the sketches. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to work. January moved the way January always does in the city. Gray and purposeful, stripped of the holiday's false warmth, everything returning to its actual shape. The streets were honest in January. The people were honest. Nobody was pretending anymore that the year was going to be anything other than what they made it. Emily Carter was making something. The preliminary design sessions for Project Riverside had started the second week of January, exactly as she'd planned. The community meetings came first. She held 3 of them, one at the Riverside Community Center, one at a senior living facility 2 blocks from the park site, one at a school on the north end of the district that served a significant population of children with physical and developmental disabilities. She showed up to each one with a blank notebook and an open question. Tell me what you need from this park that you've never had. She'd expected the practical answers, the ramp grades and the surface textures and the accessible restroom facilities. She got those, and she wrote them all down carefully, because they mattered, because they were the minimum, and the minimum was not nothing. But she also got the other answers, the ones she hadn't been able to predict from a drafting table. A man named Gerald, 67, who used a power wheelchair and had lived 2 blocks from the Riverside Park for 19 years, told her the thing he wanted most was a bench without armrests in the middle, so that he could park his chair next to it and sit beside his grandchildren instead of at the end of the row. Every bench in every park he'd ever been to had center armrests. A small thing, a nothing thing to someone who didn't need to think about it. An entire category of exclusion to Gerald, repeated across 19 years of Sundays. A mother named Dara, whose 8-year-old son used a communication device and had sensory processing differences, told Emily that what she wanted was a quiet path. Not a separate path, not a designated special needs area. Just one route through the park that wasn't next to the loudest features, the splash pad, the playground equipment, so that her son could take a walk with her and not be overwhelmed before they got to the thing they came for.
A 14-year-old girl named Carmen, who'd been blind since birth, and who sat in the front row of the school meeting, with her cane across her knees and her chin slightly up, the posture of someone who'd learned early to take up her full space, told Emily that she wanted the park to smell like something. Not perfume, not artificial. Real plants that had real scent, planted along the main path so that she could navigate partly by smell and feel fully in the park, rather than just technically present in it. Emily wrote every word down. She drove home from that last meeting with 14 pages of notes and sat at her drafting table for 2 hours without drawing anything, just reading and rereading, holding the weight of what people had said when someone finally asked. Then she picked up her pencil. The design took shape over the following weeks, the way good designs do, not from the outside in, but from the center outward. She started with the question Gerald had asked, the bench without armrests in the middle, and she let it be the first principle. Who gets to sit beside whom? From there, everything else followed. The path network designed first for the slowest and most complex user, then tested for everyone else. Because a path that worked for Carmen and Gerald and Dara's son would work for every able-bodied jogger and cyclist. But the reverse was almost never true. The sensory considerations built into the landscaping plan, not added on. The grades calculated with an obsessive precision that Marcus called, on their 4th call of the 2nd week, frankly intimidating. "Good," she said. "I didn't mean it as a criticism," he said. "I know," she said. "I still want it to be intimidating. I want every grade change in this park to be the result of someone thinking very hard about what it costs a person to navigate it." She could hear him smiling on the phone. "Emily." "What?" "It's good to have you back." She didn't deflect it this time. "It's good to be back," she said. On a Saturday in late January, Daniel brought Rosie. Emily had sent him the address of her home studio, the spare bedroom she'd converted, full of drafting equipment and scale models, and the particular organized chaos of an active design process, with the simple instruction: Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, if she still wants to come. She'd spent approximately 40 minutes the night before trying to figure out why she was nervous, and had concluded it was because Rosie mattered to Daniel in a way that made the visit feel like something more than a visit. They arrived at 10:03. Rosie Brooks was 9 years old and had dark, curly hair pulled into 2 uneven ponytails and her father's eyes. That same direct, measuring quality. The sense of someone always quietly doing the math. She was wearing a coat with a patch on one elbow and sneakers that lit up when she walked, which Emily suspected she was too old for, and had insisted on anyway. And she was carrying a small backpack that clinked slightly when she moved. "That's the kit, isn't it?" Emily said. Rosie looked at her bag, then at Emily. "I brought the bridge," she said. "Dad said I could show you if it was okay." "It's absolutely okay," Emily said. "Come in." Daniel caught her eye over Rosie's head as they came through the door. A brief look, complicated and simple at the same time. The kind that said, "Thank you," and "I know," and a few other things, without using any of those words. She held it for a second, and then moved her chair back to give them room. Rosie stopped in the doorway of the studio and looked at everything with the focused stillness of someone filing it away. "Is this where you work?" she asked. "This is where I work," Emily said. "What are you working on now?" "Come see." She wheeled to the main drafting table, and Rosie followed, standing beside the table with her hands at her sides, not touching anything, reading the drawings with that particular concentration children have when they found the thing they're actually interested in. "It's a park," Rosie said. "It's a park," Emily confirmed. "What's this?" Rosie pointed to the sensory garden section, the curbing path with the planting notations.
That's a garden designed for someone who can't see, Emily said. So the plants are chosen for their smell and their texture rather than their appearance, so that a person who's blind can walk through and feel completely present in the space. Rosie looked at the drawing for a long moment. How do you know what they smell like? She asked. I went and smelled them, Emily said. I went to a nursery and I went through every plant on the list, and I held them and smelled them. And I made Marcus, that's my colleague, I made him do it too.
Did he mind? He minded a little. He got over it. Rosie almost smiled. It was very close to Daniel's almost smile. The one that lived right on the edge of the full version, checking first. Can I show you the bridge? She asked. Please, Emily said. Rosie opened her backpack and produced the bridge with both hands, holding it level. A careful, practiced movement that said she'd carried it this way before and knew what happened if you didn't. It was a small suspension bridge, built from the kit components, roughly 12 inches long, the cables made from the fine elastic thread that came with the set, the deck constructed with a precision that was, frankly, not typical of a 9-year-old. You added counterweights, Emily said. I saw them in a video, Rosie said. I looked up how real suspension bridges work. The counterweights distribute the load so the cables don't pull the towers. She pointed to the small weighted pieces at each end. I used the extra connector blocks from the building kit. They're not the right material, but the principle is the same. Emily looked at the bridge for a moment. Then she looked at Daniel, who was leaning in the doorway with his arms folded and the expression of a man watching something he'd been hoping for a long time, careful not to show how much he'd been hoping. Rosie, Emily said, do you know what an architectural internship is? Rosie looked at her. Like when you work somewhere to learn? Like when you come here on Saturday mornings and I show you how the design process works from the beginning, and you ask questions and I answer them honestly, and you tell me when something doesn't make sense and I figure out a better way to explain it. She paused. It's unpaid and you're 9, so it's informal. But if you want to learn how this works, I'd like to teach you. The full version of the smile arrived. All at once, no more checking. Yes, Rosie said. Yeah? Emily said. Yes, Rosie said again, with the finality of someone closing a deal. Daniel made a sound in the doorway that was not a word, but was very clear in its meaning. Emily looked at him. She gets it from you, she said. The decisiveness. She gets it from herself, he said. I just try to keep up. The three of them spent 2 hours in the studio that Saturday morning. Rosie asked 47 questions. Emily counted, approximately, because she lost track somewhere in the 30s and had to estimate backward. And every one of them was the kind of question that came from actually looking at the problem, rather than the surface of it. Why this grade and not a shallower one? Why the bench placement here? Why the path curved instead of going straight? And Emily had explained the psychology of curved paths in public spaces, the way a straight line communicates transit, but a curve communicates stay. And Rosie had nodded slowly, with a look of someone adding a permanent fact to a permanent file. When they left, Rosie stopped at the door and turned back. Emily, she said. Yeah? The park is going to be really good. Emily looked at her. How do you know? You've only seen the drawings. Rosie considered this seriously. Because you care about the right things, she said. Gerald's bench, Carmen's smell garden. Those aren't things someone puts in because they have to. Those are things someone puts in because they actually thought about the people. Emily was quiet for a moment. Thank you, Rosie, she said. You're welcome. Rosie put her backpack on, the bridge safely stowed again, and walked out into the January morning with the self-contained certainty of someone who knows exactly where they're going. Daniel stood at the door a moment longer. She's going to be
he started. "I know," Emily said. "Yeah," he said. "She is."
The story of Christmas Eve at Carrington's Bistro reached the city in the way things reach cities now. Not with fanfare, not all at once, but in pieces, through channels that connected without planning. Patricia had filed her formal complaint with the city's Disability Services Office and the State Licensing Board, which generated a public record. A journalist who covered local human interest for the city paper had been at table 9 that evening, eating dinner with her mother, and had written a piece that ran in the 3rd week of January. She'd written it carefully, with a particular attention of someone who understood that the story wasn't about the restaurant. The restaurant was a detail. The story was about what happened next. It ran under a headline Emily would have chosen differently. She always preferred understatement. But the piece itself was honest and precise. It described the evening, the rejection, the man who sat down, the patio that filled, the soufflés, the long conversation in the cold. It mentioned Project Riverside and Emily's role in it. It quoted Patricia, who had opinions about being quoted, but had agreed because she said the record should be accurate. It quoted Greg Hollister, who had by then issued a formal public apology, retrained his front-of-house staff, and installed 2 new accessible tables in the main dining room. Not in the back, not tucked away, but by the window, the good window, the one with the view. It did not quote Daniel, because Daniel had declined, which was so entirely consistent with everything Emily knew about him that she hadn't been surprised at all. The piece was shared several thousand times in the first 24 hours. Emily read it once, decided she'd read it enough, and went back to work. But the responses found her anyway. Emails to the project contact address Marcus had set up, messages through the firm's website, letters, actual paper letters, forwarded from the city planning office, from people who'd read the article and had their own Gerald on the Bench story, their own Carmen and the Smell Garden story, their own version of standing outside a door that wouldn't open while the warmth stayed on the other side of the glass. She read every one of them. She kept a folder, a physical folder, cardboard, the kind she'd always used for reference materials that she needed to hold in her hands, and she put every letter in it and set it on the corner of her drafting table where she could see it while she worked. When the design wanted to compromise on something, when the budget note came back from the city, and she had to decide what held and what bent, she opened the folder. Gerald's bench held. Carmen's smell garden held. Dara's quiet path held. Every single thing that mattered to a specific person held, because those were the things she'd started with. And you don't dismantle your foundation to save money on the roof. Marcus told her twice that she was the most stubborn person he'd worked with in 20 years of architecture. She told him she'd been called worse. The groundbreaking ceremony for Project Riverside was scheduled for the first Saturday in June, which gave the design 5 months to move through approvals and permitting, a timeline that Raymond Wynn had told her was technically aggressive and practically achievable if she was willing to stay on top of the city planning office. She was willing. Kevin Park, the assistant communications manager who had spent 45 minutes on the phone with Patricia Nguyen the day after Christmas, became, over the following months, one of the most reliable and responsive city contacts she'd ever worked with. She suspected Patricia had something to do with this, but could not confirm it and chose not to investigate. The Saturday mornings with Rosie continued. Every week, without exception, rain or shine, Rosie arrived at 10:03. Never 10 exactly, never 10:05, always 10:03, which Emily had come to recognize as simply the speed at which Rosie Brooks moved through the world. With her backpack and her questions and her bridge, which she kept bringing because she kept modifying it, adding new elements, testing new principles. A project that showed no signs of being finished, because Rosie had apparently decided it wasn't finished until she understood everything it had to teach. Daniel came some Saturdays and not others, depending on his work schedule, which ran on its own unpredictable logic. On the Saturdays he came, he brought coffee, always 2 cups, always the right order for both of them, because he'd asked once, and then never needed to ask again. He sat at the small table near the window while Emily and Rosie worked, and he read, or looked at his phone, or sometimes just sat, with the particular comfortable quiet of someone who doesn't need to fill a space to feel at home in it. They had a friendship that had its own specific texture. Not romantic, or not yet, or not in a way that either of them had named, because some things don't need names to be real, and they both understood that. It was more foundational than that. The kind of thing that happens when 2 people have seen each other at their most undefended. In the cold, in the honest dark of a bad year, and chosen to keep showing up anyway. On the Friday before the groundbreaking, Emily went to the park site alone. It was late afternoon, the light going golden the way June light does in the early evening, long and warm and unhurried. The construction prep had already begun, the ground marked, the equipment staged, the first excavation done on the northeast corner where the accessible entrance path would start. It didn't look like much yet. It looked like a beginning. She rolled to the center of the site, where the main gathering space would be, the open plaza, the design heart of the whole project, the place she'd built around the question of who gets to be here. She sat there for a while. She thought about Christmas Eve, about the cold and the glass door, and the 3 words that had been meant to send her away. About the moment she'd turned her wheelchair toward the street and felt the weight of the room's silence following her out. About how close she'd come to just going home. She thought about a man in worn boots and a work jacket who'd pulled up a chair like it was the most natural thing in the world. She thought about Maisie's bread roll city with the park in the center. Parks are for everyone. That's the rule. She thought about Gerald's 19 years of Sundays sitting at the end of the row. About Carmen's cane and her chin held up. About Dara's son and the quiet path he deserved to walk with his mother. About all the letters in the cardboard folder on the corner of her drafting table. All the versions of standing at a door that wouldn't open. All the people who'd been told, in one language or another, there isn't room for you here. She looked at the marked ground around her. 12 acres. She had 12 acres in which to answer every one of those rejections. Not symbolically, not with a plaque or a mission statement or a well-intentioned gesture, with grades and surfaces and bench placements and smell gardens and path curves and counterweights. With the actual, structural, permanent fact of a place built around the question of who might be left out, and rebuilt until the answer was no one. The evening light moved across the site, warm and even. Emily Carter sat in the center of what was going to be built and felt, in her bones, the particular solidity of something that was finally going in the right direction. Not despite everything that had happened to her. Not in spite of the accident, or the hospital, or the 18 months of learning to move through a world that hadn't been designed with her in mind. Because of all of it. Because she had been on the outside of the glass, and she knew what it felt like. And that knowledge was now load-bearing. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. Rosie wants to know if she can come tomorrow. She has 17 new questions. Emily looked at the message. Looked at the marked ground. Looked at the evening light. She typed back. Tell her yes. Tell her to bring the bridge. She put her phone away and stayed a while longer, just her and the quiet and the beginning of what was about to be built. The door that had been shut on Christmas Eve had not beaten her. It had pointed her here. And here, this 12 acres of honest ground, designed for every person who had ever been told they didn't fit, was going to be open to everyone. Permanently, structurally, and without apology. That was the rule.